I nodded. "Okay," I said, "I will." "Good," he said. "Now go home, get some rest. You will need it for what is to come." I turned and left the cabin. I walked back through the woods, my mind racing. I knew that I had to learn to control my gift. I knew that I had to stop the darkness from coming, but I didn't know how. I went home and got into bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the man in the mirror and his warning. Finally, I got up and went back to the cabin. I arrived at the cabin in the middle of the night. The moon was full, and the woods were bathed in eerie moonlight. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cabin was dark and silent. I made my way to the back of the cabin and opened the door to the small room with the mirror. The mirror was still there, sitting on the table in the center of the room. I slowly approached the mirror and leaned in close. I looked into the black surface. At first I didn't see anything, but then I started to see something. I was looking at a battlefield. Soldiers were fighting and dying all around me. I saw the dark figure from before. It was standing in the middle of the battlefield, surrounded by a swirling black mist. The figure raised its hand and a beam of black light shot out from its palm. The beam struck one of the soldiers, and he instantly vaporized. I saw more beams of black light shooting out from the figure's hand. Soldiers were vaporizing all around me. I screamed and looked away from the mirror. I couldn't bear to watch anymore. I turned and ran out of the cabin. I ran through the woods. I didn't know what I had seen, but I knew one thing for sure. It was coming. And it was coming soon. I ran all the way back to my house and didn't stop until I had locked the door behind me. I collapsed into bed and closed my eyes. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. The image of the battlefield was burned into my mind, and the image of the dark figure was even more terrifying. I knew that I had to stop it, but I didn't know how. I lay in bed for hours trying to figure out what to do. Finally, I came up with a plan. I knew that the dark figure was coming to destroy the world, but I also knew that it had a weakness. The man in the mirror had told me that the dark figure couldn't be destroyed by conventional weapons, but he had also told me that it could be destroyed by light. I knew that I needed to find a way to generate a light. I knew that I needed to find a way to generate a light powerful enough to destroy the dark figure. But how? I thought about all the different sources of light that I knew of, the sun, the moon, the stars, fire, electricity. But none of those sources of light were powerful enough. I needed something more. I thought about the black mirror. I knew that it was somehow connected to the dark figure. Maybe it could be used to generate the light that I needed. I decided to go back to the cabin and see if the man in the mirror could give me any more answers. I arrived at the cabin in the early morning. The sun was shining, and the birds were singing. But I was filled with dread. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cabin was dark and silent. I made my way to the back of the cabin and opened the door to the small room with the mirror. The mirror was still there, sitting on the table in the center of the room. I slowly approached the mirror and leaned in close. I looked into the black surface. At first I didn't see anything. But then I started to see something. It was the man in the mirror. He smiled at me and said, "Hello, my son, I'm glad you came back." "I need your help," I said. "I need to find a way to generate a light powerful enough to destroy the dark figure." The man in the mirror nodded. "I know," he said, "and I can help you." He reached out and touched the mirror. The mirror began to glow. "Step back," he said. I stepped back as the mirror grew brighter and brighter. Suddenly a beam of light shot out from the mirror. The beam of light was so bright that it was blinding. I shielded my eyes with my arm, but I could still see the beam of light shooting up into the sky. The beam of light grew brighter and brighter until it was so bright that it was like a second sun. And then the beam of light disappeared. The man in the mirror turned to me and smiled. "It's done," he said. "You now have the power to destroy the dark figure." I looked at him in confusion. "But how?" I asked. "The beam of light that you just saw was the light of creation," he said. "It is the most powerful light in the universe. It can create anything and it can destroy anything." I nodded. I understand, I said. Now go, he said. Use your power to destroy the dark figure and save the world. I turned and left the cabin. I walked through the woods, my mind racing. I knew that I had to use my power carefully. I didn't want to hurt anyone innocent, but I also knew that I had to stop the dark figure. It was the only way to save the world. I walked for hours until I finally reached the city. I could see the dark figure in the distance. It was standing in the center of the city, surrounded by a swirling black mist. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. I concentrated on the light of creation. I felt the power coursing through my veins. I opened my eyes and raised my hand. A beam of light shot out from my palm. The beam of light was even brighter than the one from the mirror. The beam of light struck the dark figure. The dark figure screamed in agony as it began to disintegrate. The black mist around the dark figure disappeared. The dark figure itself began to shrink and shrink until it was nothing more than a speck of dust. The speck of dust blew away in the wind. The dark figure was gone. I had saved the world. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the spot where the dark figure had been. I couldn't believe that it was over. I had done it. I had stopped the darkness. I turned and walked away. I knew that I would never forget what had happened, but I also knew that it was time to move on. I had a new life to live, a life without darkness. And so, another chapter in the twisted world of Mr. Beastly has been completed. Stay tuned for the next chapter in the Mr. Beastly saga.